There it goes. Hi, I'm President of Collarwood for YouTube, and joining me here tonight is Morgan Brown at Magical Rod on Twitter. We're here to discuss Dark Shadows, but we're here to discuss what characters we would bring to Collinwood, other fictional characters from franchises. Plus, I'm going to ask Morgan some Dark Shadows questions and pick his brain on stuff. So, what fictional characters would you bring or like to see come to Collinwood?
I love that question when you asked me. It really got my brain going on a lot of different characters. You know, of course, I started with some of my favorites. I was a big Buffy the Vampire Slayers fan. Kind of started thinking about some of those, and that kind of led me into Supernatural. I think there's a big Supernatural fandom, and I've watched a lot of those and enjoy them. And uh, I couldn't quite get any of those characters in my head to fit, and I couldn't quite think of why. Uh, and then I started kind of thinking, well, maybe it's that they're too like confrontational, something more like investigative. So then I thought of the X Files.
Sure.
Fox and Dana from there, and I was like, well, that could be an interesting idea. And I think what I was thinking with a lot of them was I would love to see all of those as like a one show thing, like a one show crossover. But none of them felt right for like a continuous presence for a while. And then I started thinking about, well, maybe I'm going about this the wrong way. What are the kind of qualities of a character that would fit in with that? And I was kind of thinking, like somebody that could be, sort of intuitive and empathic with the characters that are on there, but not necessarily get super involved. And that it made my brain think of the Prime Directive from Star Trek. And I started going in a whole different direction with it rather than supernatural, a little more sci-fi. And I thought of one of my favorite Star Trek characters that I never felt got enough airtime was Deanna Troy's mother, Lwaxana Troy.
Okay.
And I was like, I would love to see her like somehow transporter accident or something, maybe back in time, realizes that she can't influence things. She doesn't want to change history or mess with this culture, but is still interacting with them with that kind of empathicness. But she was always such a wild card too. She had that almost Pansy Faye kind of feel to her, where she was wild and pushed everybody's boundaries. And I was like, I think that out of everybody that I kind of thought of it, I was like, that's the one my brain keeps going back to, that I'm like, seems unusual or unexpected, but I was like, I think Lwaxana Troy would be my pick.
There's a ton of characters, and I've said this to everybody. I'm like, you don't just have to bring. You can pick more than one. God knows I did.
Right.
And really, what started my question, all these really, what character would you bring to Collinsport, was the dream I had for the fan fiction story I would go on to write, and that was Hell on Halloween Night. In Collinsport, and bringing Michael Myers to Collinsport. And somebody asked me, well, was it initially about bringing Michael and Barnabas together? I'm thinking, not really, because it's not. Here's the thing: I was writing two other Dark Shadow stories at the time, two different ones. So I'm thinking, okay, I don't need to write any more stories because I'm doing two. And I tell my brain this, and it never listens. So my daughter was sick one night, and she was on the couch. She was laying there asleep. So I'm sitting up on the couch on the far end, and I just dozed off, and I'm like sitting in a passenger seat of an SUV, and it's snowing. And here's the thing: if you're from the East Coast or you're from a certain part of the country, snow's nothing new.
Right.
So when I see the snow, it's like no big deal. It's not like, oh, there's Collinsport. There, that's Collinwood. No, I just thought I was going for a ride somewhere, you know.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, wait a second. I'm in the passenger side. Who's driving? And I turned to the left, and there's John Tate from Halloween H2O, and I knew that's who it was. It was Josh Hartnett, and I knew that's exactly what it was. I'm thinking, but I didn't say, hey, John Tate. I said, so, what's up? Like, some conversation. And he's like, he's after me. He's after me. Michael Myers is coming for him. I'm thinking, oh, okay. I'm thinking this is good. In my mind, when I'm dreaming this, I'm thinking this is going nowhere. Can I wake up now? And no, I can't. So as the dream goes on, he hits a patch of ice and we crash. We're getting out the car. We're walking. Thinking, where the hell are we headed? That's when the question finally hit. Because we're somewhere. This just didn't happen in my dream. It happened for a reason. This little accident. And so we're walking and he stops. And I look up and it says, welcome to Collinsport. I'm thinking, son of a bitch. No. No. I told myself in my brain no 20 times in the dream and like 50 when I woke up. Thinking, no, I'm not writing that. I'm not writing that. And the reason I kept telling myself no, it's because, number one, I'm already doing 2 stories at the same time. Number 2, it's just like Michael Myers coming to Collinsport, and then I'm like, to go face to face with Barnabas. That's what it ultimately is going to be.
Right.
You know, no matter who you are, any writer's going to take advantage of that opportunity. If you're bringing Michael Myers to Collinsport, you're having him go face to face with Barnabas.
Right.
So I'm just like, you know what? Fuck it, write it. And then I started writing. So that's what really started the whole question of, okay, I know who my brain thought of to bring a fucking Collinsport.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Who would everyone else? And here's the thing: it's an odd question for sure. It's something that you could bring a number of people to Collinsport because I think there's a number of characters out in other franchises that do belong there.
Right.
The one I've most said, and I know a lot of people say Carl Kolchak, which I don't disagree with at all. You know, and me and Patrick, my buddy Patrick McRae, we did a video, past, present, and future of Carl Kolchak, and initially the video was about it was how would Carl Kolchak come to Collinsport, and then we just discussed Kolchak as the entirety of like, hey, what would a Kolchak look like today?
Right.
And so, but there's 2 characters I think would really make a lot of sense. Now, one would only be there shortly, but the other, so I won't mention because I've mentioned the Shadow so many times and other things. The Shadow would really fit anywhere because he has agents.
Right.
He has agents all over the world. I've often said it would be too easy to make the Shadow over Haddonfield story because you could just say Dr. Loomis was an agent of the Shadow.
Right.
And here's, people might say, well, why didn't he contact the Shadow? If you listen to the Shadow's agents, they tend to try to handle the matter themselves. And they that's how they sort of get themselves in trouble too. Now, with Loomis, he may have just did it longer. Now, the one character I think most belongs in Collinsport from another franchise is Yu Yu Hakusho's Yusuke Urameshi, the spirit detective, because he's somebody who died and then became the spirit detective of the underworld, like catching ghosts, basically.
Okay.
And he literally solves the crimes of the dead. I mean, that's
right.
If that doesn't scream Dark Shadows, you know, nothing will.
Well, I think they even kind of have touched on that with early on, like Dr. Guthrie. I felt like he had that kind of feel of like a paranormal investigator, but also he was there to like kind of help the whatever the presence was if he could, you know. um yeah, absolutely, I think that's a great idea. The idea of the shadow with the agents, that almost makes me think of like what if maybe they had roots in a group that was an opposing force to Judo Zachary's coven that
Yeah.
has now grown into this secret agency that kind of, works against those forces.
That's the thing too. Like they've done things in the shadow, like the Silent Seven or the Faithful 50, where there's been other secret, groups. So it's nothing far fetched. The only thing is there's usually a logical explanation behind everything with the shadow, because the shadow's human. He's
Right.
not supernatural, but he deal he fights evil by using evil's tactics against them.
Right.
Evil usually has henchmen, while the shadow has agents. Um, Evil usually moves in darkness. The shadow moves in darkness very well.
Absolutely.
And, so he uses a lot of their tactics against them. And I think that's something that with Dark Shadows would make sense. But again, with most of these characters, any character really, I mean, it would have to be a character that was sort of maybe by accident created for Dark Shadows, or created by Dan Curtis for a Dark Shadows episode and they never had on. And I don't know if they ever did that. I don't know if Dan Curtis, or I'm sure, I would like to think that they created a character they never used. Maybe. I don't know.
Right.
Um, but there could be that too, where there's just this character laying around that they never used for DS, which is crazy because you would think they used a lot of different characters for Dark Shadows. I mean, you saw Death, for God's sakes. So,
Right. Right.
like,
That's actually brings me to another idea that I had. Uh, the comic book Sandman by Neil Gaiman, the author. I thought his character of Dream would be maybe an interesting one to bring in, especially something like maybe, I could see the Dream Curse somehow bringing his awareness to the situation there and being like, what are they using these powers for? Like, but in that comic series, he's related to Death, and so you're right, we do see Death in Dark Shadows, so you could almost be like, oh, there's a prior presence here. Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's so much to draw on, and of course they did in the show, so many classic horror uh, themes, as well as direct characters, and things like that. I think that's one of the great things about it is the way they were able to kind of make this amalgam out of all of those things. Although he's not one of my favorite characters in the show, I really think that Dan did such a good representation of the Frankenstein story, as far as humanizing Frankenstein. I think in a lot of the other representations, we see him more as the monster without this intellect. But with Adam, you really see this growth and this progression. He still, there are things about Adam that just still bug the Jesus out of me. Someone I follow on Twitter calls him Incel Frankenstein, and I was like, boy, that kind of nails it. Like, he's so like, I deserve to have you, Carolyn, and you're like, what? Like, where are you getting that from, dude? Like, back off. But at the same time, you see this growth in him over his arc, where you're like, oh wow, he's struggling with being a fully formed human without a lifetime of experience. And I really felt that's one of the times that you see that in a Frankenstein story. that I thought was really good.
Robert Rodan does not, and Patrick McRae was talking about this too. Robert Rodan does not get enough credit for Adam. The writers too, but
Yeah.
this is the benefit of doing a Frankenstein style story in a TV series, whereas opposed to a movie, you only have so much time, like an hour or maybe two. Whereas in a TV series, well, you don't have to rush this.
Right.
And I don't. Did Adam get rushed on? Perhaps he did a bit, but I don't think it shows, like, at all. I don't.
I don't think so either, because uh, one of the things that I think is interesting with Adam is you see his interaction with so many different characters and how they influence him, whether it be with Willie or Professor Stokes or Evan, not Evan Hanley. Oh, I'm blanking. It's the same actor. That
Nicholas Blair.
Nicholas Blair. Thank you. Yes. And from each of them, he kind of learns different things. Whether they're positive or negative. That's one of the great things about that. And yes, I think you're right. Robert Rodan really did do a great job. Really a great acting job with that character, because you really do. You see that progression in him as a character, in the character of Adam. As he grows and learns.
I said this too. He's the most yin and yang character in the entire series. There's good and there's bad in him. Even more so than Barnabas, because with Barnabas, I felt sorry for him. There was a line that Fred uttered to Josette's portrait that I felt sorry for him, thinking, man, this dude's just, there's a lot of emotion in this dude. With Adam, you're getting the gradual steps of a character, and slowly you're getting, well, he learns some of this, which is good. He learns some of this, which is bad. And so there's really, ultimately, he has to choose who he wants to be. And I think that's the message too with Adam too. Just as he has to choose who he wants to be, we all have to choose who we want to be. And I think that's, whether they meant to put that in there or not, they did in every way. And it's really just well done. I think Eve is a nice addition even. And Marie Wallace's character is really interesting. But I think the Adam arc is really underrated. It doesn't quite get the appreciation it deserves. I do want to ask you, do you think they should have kept Dr. Guffrey around? Were you shocked they killed him?
I was surprised that they killed him. I felt that was a pretty wow, this. We've definitely dealt with some kind of darker things, but you're like, ooh, this just got really dark, especially the way he died, kind of burned alive in his car by Laura. Yes, I that was one moment where you're like, whoo, wow, what just happened? I would have loved to seen him kept around, but more than him was it Madam Findlay? I really would have liked to seen her stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, the lady who comes and tries to help Barnabas.
Yeah, and she's a psychic and she's totally getting in touch with stuff, and then I think it's Quentin's ghost gets her, and you're like, oh man, she was really shaping up to be interesting, and maybe a good counterpoint to Julia. But yeah, she didn't last very long, unfortunately.
That's Mark Gilman said that too. He goes, you notice the characters who come on and find out some sort of secret, end up dying.
Right.
And it's because knowledge is power, but curiosity will get you killed. And Collinsport, I agree with that. That's what makes Collinsport, Collinwood, and Dark Shadow so intriguing and so dangerous when you're thinking about these characters who are all curious. It's like, so if any one of these get curious enough, are they going to get axed?
Right. Yes,
Like,
absolutely. Or like know too much specific information, like when it's kind of depending on who they're dealing with, of course, but like once they get too close to somebody's secret, that's where, yeah, Collinsport is full of secrets, and people will kill to keep them. You know what I mean? Like, well, and they'll sometimes kill to keep other people's secrets, like we see with Bill Malloy, Bill Malloy's death.
it makes me wonder about. Um, it always made me wonder about Burke Devlin's private investigator Wilbur Strake. Like, I know they just basically write him off, like they just send him away pretty much, and you never see him again. But it always makes me wonder: did Wilbur Strake find out something and get capped somewhere? We just never heard about it.
Right. Jeez. You never know. I mean, at that point, I wouldn't have put it past Burke to have it done. Be like, well, I got the files. We'll see you later. Well, or did he? Who knows? In his poking around, that could even be a good character to turn into a Kolchak type character.
Right.
Maybe his poking around, all of a sudden he came across other things that he was like couldn't let go and had to investigate more, that led him into the dark underbelly of Collinsport.
I think another way too that they could bring him back or use him in a story is maybe Wilbur Strake, didn't get killed. Maybe he got in an accident investigating something, and he's just been in a coma this whole time. Right. That's just where Dark Shadows has all these characters at their disposal. They could easily use or put in a plot storyline or plot device, as I call it. But I sort of wonder, I don't think Wilbur Strake's necessarily dead, but I do think something did happen to him. I don't think he just, went away.
Right.
I do think because if you have a private investigator constantly digging at something, eventually, yeah, they might not find something out about Liz or even Victoria herself, but they're going to find out something about somebody.
It could be somebody completely unrelated to the Collins.
Right.
I'm sure there are other secrets boiling in that town.
Right. Right.
And there's probably a long history of that. You know what I mean? I've wondered about other families of Collinsport, and even other families of the area. Thinking, do the Collins have any kind of competition? Maybe not even competition, not necessarily competition as far as the fishing industry, but other big industry. Like, are there timber families around that area, or other big industries that grew up with the area that maybe they have interactions with? Maybe those families have secrets, or have tapped into the power of the landscape around there or something. I think I was kind of thinking of the show on, I think it's the CW, and it's also on HBO Max streaming, the new Nancy Drew show. And in that, there are a couple big, powerful families in town you find, and they have, they're kind of part of different industries, but there's some overlap. And that got me thinking of kind of like the Collins and like, well, who are the other kind of titans of industry in the area? I'm sure there are some.
Right. Right, because Burt Devlin has people who are wanting to help him, fund him to put the Collinses out of business, and you don't really know who exactly they are. So it's like, if there's that type of people, how many others out there are that are like that?
I have wondered before, yes, what exactly was Burke Devlin's business and how did he make his money? You know, like you hear about these deals in South America and like stuff like this, but I don't think it's ever really defined what his business was. And I've always kind of wondered, like, oh, how did he make his fortune, you know?
I'm sort of wondering if he was some sort of gun runner, or not necessarily I don't want to say drug dealer, but gun runner, or somebody who, like a Tony Stark, was in stuff that was
Right.
gonna get him in trouble one day, or gonna make him really famous. Burke Devlin is in many ways is sort of like an anti-hero almost, because there's times you want to dislike him, but then there's times he's like, oh, he's really cool.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah. I think that, yeah, there's something that, yeah, you're kind of like, you definitely question, but you empathize with him because I think everyone would have, whether or not they went through with it, they would at least have that natural inclination towards like, wow, I've been really wronged. I want revenge,
right,
especially where you see like you get the feeling that his kind of lust for revenge is what drove him to amass this kind of fortune and small, personal empire
right.
that's fairly formidable. Uh, you know, um, so in a way, he used it in a positive way. And you also, I feel like, see that's where later on you see with him that kind of tenderness with David and his reluctance to really go through with destroying the Collins, because I don't think he really is a bad guy.
Right.
I think he almost wants to be the bad guy, but he's not.
He, he's not a full blown heel. He's sort of a shades of gray character in every way.
Yes.
He's not this overbearing bad guy. Because if he wanted to be, he could have been, and he just doesn't be. I mean, there's times he could have just destroyed, Victoria, or even Carolyn, and not gave a shit. He doesn't do that really. Like, I don't even really think sending Mrs. Johnson as a spy is destroying the family. It more makes me question what was Mrs. Johnson doing in prior to housekeeping, um,
Well,
working for MI6.
it ends up being like you're kind of like, oh, it ends up being this really nice thing. Like it's sort of like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this devious thing. You're gonna go spy on them, but she just lost like kind of the closest person she had in her life. Really had no other work. It gave her like family and support and all of that. You're like, that ended up being a really good thing that he did.
Do you think Okay, there's always this fun fan theory that Mrs. Johnson is the ultimate spy, and it's something I don't disagree with necessarily. Do you think Mrs. Johnson's family is a complete, even Harry, because we don't see Harry all that much. Do you do you think Mrs. Johnson family is a complete work, a complete disguise? It's just something that's a cover for her.
Ooh, I had not thought of that. Yeah, she. I think at one time mentioned something about a sister or something, but
Yeah.
basically says something like, I wouldn't even have anything to do with them, even if I had to," kind of a deal. You're like, wow, okay. Uh, yeah, that's well, I could almost see her in a like, OSI, something like that. Maybe back in the day she was part of some kind of an actual like spy organization and is now tired to Collinsport to live a quiet little life, where no one asks questions.
I, I just want I just want to travel back to 1966, and I want 20 minutes in Mrs. Johnson's room without her bothering me, because I'm searching underneath the pillow, I'm searching underneath the socks, I'm checking for falls, because I'm checking for a 45, I'm checking
Right.
for a gun, and if that woman has a gun, that woman was a spy, y'all.
Well, now I'm picturing, yeah, thinking of like fictional characters. I'm like, now I'm picturing like a James Bond, Mrs. Johnson spinoff, you know, like.
Right? That's the thing too. It's like we don't know what the hell she was doing prior to being a housekeeper, like at all. Like, and like you said, her when she mentions her family, it's worse than when the Collins mention theirs. It's like,
Yeah,
what do you mean you don't really want nothing to do with him? What? Like,
right. Yeah.
huh?
Yeah, it really is like, it seems pretty hardcore about that, where you're like, wow, okay. Um, but yeah, it would be interesting to see her do a complete turnaround in her character. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden come out really, confident and sleek and like that. I think that would be really interesting. Like, um, even in her different lives as like, oh, she was so awful. Mrs. I'm terrible with names tonight. Mrs. Trask as Reverend Trask's wife, or even as was it Joshua Collins' sister. She still is that same kind of character as Mrs. Johnson. And it'd be neat to see her turn around and play someone that was like a Mrs. James Bond, you know?
Yeah, Abigail. I think the biggest difference, even though like Mrs. Johnson sort of mentions God briefly, I think Abigail's way more religious, like a more religious character.
Yeah.
Mrs. Johnson, though, I have so much suspicion towards Mrs. Johnson. It's like I've never. The thing too is when she's talking to Jason McGuire, he's like, she's like, oh, he was asking questions about the family. He's like, oh, your family. She's like, no, you wouldn't get two words out of me about my family. I'm like,
Right.
damn, girl.
Yes. And that's funny. I hadn't thought of it, but you're right. The way she does it just shuts people down so completely that you just don't ask any more questions. And it makes you wonder, like, is that her plan? Is it to shut people down?
And that's what brings me to Harry Johnson. It's like, okay, here's this woman who has been so not really given a flying fuck about mentioning her family. All of a sudden, here comes her son, and it's like, oh, that's my son Harry. I'm thinking, your son Harry, like, I'm like, wait a second. No, I know what this is. This is like an agent in training. You're gonna like work them and make sure they learn properly, or you're gonna take them out back and just shoot them and throw them off Widow's Hill. You know, if it doesn't work out, you'll just say, "Oh, I don't know where he went."
Right. Right. I was always kind of surprised. Yeah, like the way she is about the rest of her family and stuff like that, and the way he's kind of hanging on that last string with her. I'm like, wow, it seems like she would just like kick him out and be like, no, you gotta go. You can't risk my job and my livelihood and stuff like that here. But she does. She keeps allowing him to be there, even though he keeps causing trouble, you know. So yeah, it does make me wonder if there's not something more there, you know.
Right? It's a crazy thought too because it's like I don't think she's a bad person necessarily. I just find her really suspicious because it's like, I mean, she mentions less about her family than the Collinses do. I mean, we know the Collins family history book is a lie for the most part, but it's like there is some truth to that book. It's not a complete lie, just
Right.
most of it.
One thing that I had wondered about is if there couldn't have been some kind of a connection between maybe Willie and Harry, like maybe they met in jail at some point, or had some prior acquaintance. but because they both seem to have that kind of shady background,
No.
uh,
Yeah, that's the thing too. Like she says about him that he was in trouble or something. So it makes you wonder, well, like, was he in jail or some sort, or was he in some sort of prison or something? And maybe Willie did know him. We just don't know, you know.
right.
There's That's this thing, like with all these characters, like there's like a big world of possibility of like, okay, if they were here, did they know this person, or if they were in this jail or here, did Willie meet them? You know,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there could be crossovers like that because I don't remember. I don't remember if was. Do we ever see like Willie and Harry interact?
I don't really recall either. Trying to think.
So,
I don't. I
like
don't
maybe
recall.
Willie was like at the sanitarium
I know.
during that arc or
I
something. I
I
just
know. I know Willie comes back. I think by the time Willie comes back, we don't really see much of Harry after that.
right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think because Willie gets brought back because of Adam. You know,
Right.
he's getting.
Yeah.
They're writing John Carlin back in, and it's like I was talking about this Willie post Wincliffe Sanitarium. Willie is fighting many battles of sanity
Man.
and identity.
Man, I tell you, that would be, I don't know if there's a fictional character already existing that would fit this role, but I would love to see like a post Barnabas, like Willie's therapist. You know what I mean? Like, because what he ends up going through from the way he starts, where you really kind of hate him and you're like, man, this is a bad dude, to what he ends up going through, like, man, when they tell him that he basically has to dig up bodies, he is like, and that is one of the examples of John Carlin's great acting because you really feel that just horror and disgust from Willie of like, I'm not doing that. Like I've done a lot for you, Barnabas. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, that's here's what's weird about this too, because while he's in Wincliffe, Barnabas asked Julia that she says, I want Willie Loomis released under your care, you know, that way he can be here and watch Adam and do what we need him to do. And she goes, well, yeah, I receive reports on him, you know, because he's my patient. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, then you got to be getting back to psychological evaluation of Willie Loomis because Barnabas isn't a vampire no more. He's not really going to have the control he had over Willie. Will Willie is coming from a sanitarium, mental hospital. Will John Carlin shows a lot of range with Willie Loomis, and this is one of those where he has his face of pure insanity and pure sadisticness, and it's like they should not have put that man out of the nut house at
Yes.
all, at all.
It's one of those examples too where you're like, dang, Julia, like you may not be like a monster, but some of your ethical decisions kind of put you in that position. Because you're right, like this whole time, like she's been receiving reports about like his psychology and like all of that, like, and now she's gonna take him out and be like, no, you have to do this. Otherwise, like you're going put back in there forever, never coming out. Like, oh man, like you're like, that's pretty evil. Like uh sh- Julia makes some decisions that really make you go, ooh, I'm not sure if I would have done that.
Yeah, she says that. Oh, his report. Oh, they've been pretty good. I'm thinking, are you just saying that to keep in Barnabas's good graces here, or do you know because you know we know you're in love with Barnabas, so it makes me wonder: is she just telling a stone faced lie just to just
Right.
like? It's like,
oh yeah, don't worry about it, he's fine. Like, yeah, like yeah, where you're like, he is obviously not fine. Like everything that he went through up to the point of like the sanitarium, like when you think about his affection for Maggie Evans and basically Barnabas forcing Willie to keep Maggie captive so he can brainwash her, you're like, what a messed up position for Willie to be in. That obviously, kind of messed him up. So then he's in Wincliffe getting therapy and all of a sudden gets yanked out to dig up some bodies for these guys again. You're like, oh man, this poor guy.
and then he's like somewhat in love with Maggie. He's got feelings for Maggie. And I mean, I get it. It's Catherine Lee Scott, who wouldn't. But it's like, Willie, you realize you were in a mental hospital because they feel you kidnapped this woman. Like, it's not going to look good you going near her.
Yeah, it's really not, and it's just he just doesn't get it, and he just can't stay away from her. It's almost like his attraction to like jewels and the shiny things. He's gotten fixated on her, and just that's where I feel like his love for Maggie Evans is very that kind of borderline obsession, because he's even like, you don't have to love me, I just want to try to protect you and make sure you're okay. But even when she's like, get away from me, and he's like, I just want to protect you, and you're like, dude, again, you just need to back off. Like,
Right. It's like you keep giving this woman stuff. It's like, dude, they're going to throw your butt back in the clink here.
yeah, like, it's great you want to protect her, but lurking around the bushes outside her house at night is not the way to go about it. You're like,
And I swear, too, like, the Collinsport Police Department have nothing better to do than to spend their time at the gun range, because they're the most accurate shots in
right,
police history. They shoot up Willie Loomis like he's Swiss cheese, dude.
right, yeah. You're like, yeah. Maybe that's the fictional crossover we need, is they go to the range and it's a stormtrooper training them.
You see all these like perfect shots, like everyone's getting 100% on the gun range, and it's like at the end there's a stormtrooper like, okay, my work is done here.
Right, I'm done.
They could have pictures of Willie Loomis, like,
Right.
like, like. I think that's the thing too with the Collinsport Police Department. There's so few crime. They're so bored out of their mind. They got to be doing something with their free time, and
Yeah, well, and I think it's funny how that's one of those kind of inconsistencies that you're like, what? I feel like their numbers seem to vary a lot. Like they don't, like, you only ever see one or two, but then all of a sudden, yeah, there's like whole search parties going out that are, searching the grounds, and yeah, multiple gunshots, and like,
you know what it is, hey, you might get to shoot somebody today. All right, everyone's going into work.
right.
That's what that is. Everyone's, wait, we might shoot somebody today. Hold on, let me get my gun.
Oh, that's where you wonder how. I think I watched one of your videos about the police files of Collinsport, and it is kind of funny to think about what kinds of things do they end up investigating, because you certainly see, like, even people like the Collinses are very reluctant to call the police in on a lot of things because they don't want their own secrets getting dug into. But I bet that they get called for a lot of weird other stuff.
I think a lot of the things they might get called in for, because means all these curvy roads that you see, is accidents, or vehicular homicide or something like that. That's something I could see them getting called in for, or But I do think that there is a legit of Collinsport police officers with their free time, and they just go to the gun range because I've never when Willie's in front of Maggie's double door, where the double door window, like, it's glass.
Right.
Not one bullet hits that
It's
glass.
that glass.
It just hits Willie, and it's like them's got
But
to
manages
be.
not to injure him like fatally or super significantly either. You know. So,
No, you know who's teaching the Collinsport police how to shoot? The Shadow, because
right.
that was the best marksman ever. Like, he'd shoot a gun out of someone's wrist, just boom.
Right.
The guys just like this, bam. Okay, you're good. And I think that's the weird thing too. The
Either
Collinsport.
that or like years ago, Maggie had bulletproof windows installed because her dad kept breaking them or something. You know, she's like, "Oh no, these are bulletproof. We're good."
That's right. I think that's interesting too with the Collinsport. Police. I do think they investigate other things. I think they, like I said, vehicular homicides. Maybe if somebody, they feel somebody's like coming into town that they're not familiar with. I think where the police suspect most is somebody who hasn't grown up in the town or somebody who just wanders in the town. That's something I think the police maybe sort of poke their nose into. And we don't hear that a little too often, but it's something I could see them doing.
Oh, I could absolutely even like before the actual werewolf attacks, maybe people having sightings,
Right.
being like, "Hey, I saw this thing and didn't know," and they're calling it in, or the various ghostly sightings, I'm sure would at least occasionally get reported to the police. I, yeah, I imagine that they probably have their own like, oh, that's a bottom drawer file. That's where all the weird ones go with the unexplained. Just put it in there.
I want to see all the reports on the dead calves that Barnabas. I want to see the like, like
it was it was really Barnabas that started cattle mutilation rumors.
it really
Yeah.
is. That's the crazy part about that. It's like Joe Haskell. We found a dead calf. He's completely drained of blood. No one knows what to make of it. Here's a That's one paper. Here's the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And it's like,
Right.
we got a whole cabinet now. We got one whole
Right.
file now, one whole roll here. And it's like that
Well,
that is
especially
that is if they have a file, somebody like were to open the file saying what they see cattle mutilation, like, what the fuck is this?
it makes you wonder though too when you consider that like the witch trials that Victoria's a part of back in the day. Maybe that's even something where like that constabulary eventually grew into the police department. They could have records dating back several centuries of the weird occurrences and things like that. I think I made a post about something recently, but it had been making my mind got working on it watching some of the old Dark Shadows. I had said about making that connection of Jameson and his relation to Elizabeth and stuff, but Nora, his sister, and being like, oh, that's a character I would love to see come up as being like, oh, because she says it, I think, several times, like, I like secrets, which is just the way she says it is so creepy. I love it. But I could see as she grew up becoming almost an investigator type herself, delving into not only her family's secrets but also the secrets of Collinsport.
Yeah, I could see that too. Maybe she's somebody who, you're right. Maybe she could have became an investigator. We don't know. like the branches of the Collins family, something I was touching upon. We don't know what these people have been through or what they're doing. We don't know what
Right.
this one's doing, what that one's doing. And that's something I hope the new Dark Shadows series gets into a bit. That we don't just, yeah, we do touch upon the ones at Collinwood and Collinsport, but the other ones too. The other ones, what are they doing? What have they
Right.
been through? That's something I'm very, very hopeful of.
Absolutely. I can see uh there's the Anne Rice novels, the uh which which Witching Hour, I think, was the first one. But I think there's a couple novels, and in those there's kind of almost like the Watchers and Buffy. I think they're called like the Talamasca. I could see Nora being a part of or starting her own group like that was sort of like, we sit in the shadows and just learn as much as we can about all of the dark goings ons, you know.
Yeah. That would be something too, like where maybe she created a group like that, right? Too.
Right.
We don't know. I'm trying to think of what I was gonna ask you. Oh, gosh. Oh, Logansport. You were saying about the businesses where we know where Burke bought Logansport, and he sort of was letting it run itself, like he would put it money into it. So, what do you think became of Logansport today? Like, do you think someone else is running that?
That is a good question. Well, and when Burke eventually would have been probably declared dead,
Yeah,
who inherited his fortune? Who ended up running his businesses and companies? That is a good question.
right.
Um, it makes me think though of talking earlier about big families like that. If there wasn't maybe just like the Collins, maybe there was a Logan family. Maybe the Collins drove them out of business. They're still there waiting to seek revenge.
Right, there's some the possibility of all this stuff in Dark Shadows and what could be is just mind blowing and a half. It's just craziness.
Yes.
Wh- Let me see, I'm trying to think of the other question I had for you. What do you think? What do you think about the Widows of Widow's Hill, the Legend of Widow's Hill, too?
I mean, I love it. I think that uh, I think it could be expanded on for sure. That's one area that we get teased with these stories, but who really were these women, and what was their story?
Right.
Uh, and you could almost see, like, talking about there being maybe some sort of mystical quality to the landscape of around the area. I think at one point the idea had come up of caves underneath, but
Right.
then you've got almost Widow's Hill as this peak, or this apex maybe to that energy that somehow drew the widows there. Uh, 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 you hear the story of how when the Collins took over that area, they kept the widows out. And Victoria's kind of like, oh, how horrible. Maybe they were doing that for their protection. That there's something that if someone was in a state of despair, it would draw them there to cast themselves off.
Right. I think so. But I'd like to think, though, too, is the women all jumped because of their husbands not returning home to the sea. Maybe all those captains had worked for the Collinses, and Widow's Hill is, well, it Collins up there, and that's where the Collins family sort of reside. So that's where they jumped, and that's you're right though too. That there could be a force that we don't know about that
Something that,
drew
because
right.
we see definitely there's something that all of the women that have jumped there, their spirits still continue to return.
Yep.
And to kind of protect the Collins family or family members. That's one reason why I think a lot of us are like, oh, Victoria, because she gets protected by Josette and the widows.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think the only person they called was Elizabeth. And I think that too, a part of that is Elizabeth's own guilt, over something she believes she did. And she doesn't really want to marry Jason McGuire.
right? Yes, absolutely. Elizabeth is one character that I think too. You see, I feel like she struggles with sort of death ideology. We see that later on with the curse from I guess it's Cassandra, probably Angelique's incarnation is Cassandra, where
Yeah.
she becomes obsessed with her own death, and there's that with Widow's Hill, but then also I think with well, I guess the coma curse from Laura, she doesn't necessarily get obsessed with her own death, but she starts getting real, like, a little wacky and then goes into the coma. But yeah, Elizabeth, that's one of the interesting things that I've thought about her characters, that there seems to be this underlying current of, like, this worry of her own mortality.
Especially with, like you said, the Cassandra storyline where she's like, oh, I want a special mausoleum built. I want this, she wants all this stuff. And it's like, damn, that Cassandra has her under bad.
Yeah,
It's like,
and I think she does it's such a good representation of like somebody dealing with like obsessive thought patterns.
yep.
Where she even says at one time where she's like, I don't want to think about these things, but I can't help it. And she just does such a good job. I love the scene when she's like going through her closets and it seems all fairly like happy and stuff, and she's talking to Carolyn, and then it's man like that turns into well, I have to pick out something to wear for when I die, and you're just like, oh, I thought this was going good and now I realize it's not.
Wow, did that stop and turn on a dime real quick? Like,
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And the idea of her mausoleum, I would love to know, yeah, whatever became of Liz's mausoleum. Um, you know?
Like, did they just leave it up? I mean, you would think they would have.
I would love to see even in a modern incarnation or tale, here many years later, they're all there and all of a sudden they start hearing a bell ring and they're like not sure what it is and track it down and oh god, it's the bell in Liz's old mausoleum. Why is it ringing?
Like, she can't still be alive, can she?
Right? Like it's been 40 years. Like
that's some Night of the Living Dead creepy shit right there.
right?
Like, creepy, what I love it. That's really good. Is there anything you want to add before we go?
No, I think I'm good. Just I'm excited to talk Dark Shadows. That's been fun.
I think too, before we go, the whole mausoleum thing too, I definitely think they could expand on that too, where maybe Liz wasn't put in that mausoleum and maybe somebody else was, years later, and that's why maybe you hear the bell,
Right.
And they're still alive somehow,
Right.
There could be that, you don't know.
Absolutely. You can even do a modern version of or iteration of maybe they hear the bell start ringing and then all of a sudden like the elderly grandmother in bed is like the secret, now I must tell you the secret.
That's weird too. When they said about a bell, because that's how they used to determine somebody wasn't dead or undead. That if you heard a bell, the bell they used to put bells in coffins, and when you would hear the bell, it meant that person was either alive or undead. So, and that's sort of weird. They did that with Dark Shadows, but it's at the same time it's creepy as hell.
It is creepy, and I love that. Yes, that they drew on that kind of like historical, like trivia. That
Yep.
yeah, at one time there was, because there was that real fear of being buried alive.
Yep.
So they had a variety of mechanisms to be like, I'm not dead.
Now they pretty much make sure you are.
Yeah, pretty much anymore. The whole embalming process takes care of it. If you're not dead, you will be after that.
Right. That's pretty much it too. Morgan Brown, man, I had a blast. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, man. I appreciate it.
It was
Um,
good talking to you, Jewel.
sorry for the time confusion, man.
Oh yeah, no problem. That was much me.
And no, we're not gonna set our watches next time either. We're just gonna, up, somebody's like, damn it, no.
Right, yeah, just awesome. Well, it
Go
was good talking to you. We'll talk again.
go follow him at Magical Rod on Twitter. I'm Joel Staines. Thanks, Morgan.